Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a senior consultation specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we are continuing our series of live stream topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we are covering parallel our project activities, so we hope these will help our viewers and listeners better understand the project and provide input along the way. So I am flying solo today, so bear with me and why don't we get started? Today we're going to talk about the geology, terrain, and soil studies that we're doing as part of the environmental and impact assessments. And I'll start off with a discussion of what we're going to talk about today, sort of a run through of everything we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the geology, terrain, and soil study plan objectives, the overall purposes of these field studies, just so people can see the big picture of things. We're going to talk about the investigations and how they can help the EA and IA, or how they will help the EA and IA, and then the specific activities such as drilling and well investigation, soil and sediment sampling, aggregate source investigations, geotechnical field investigations, and geochemical investigations. We'll talk about what's been done so far, and then we'll wrap up with how you can contact us so we can get your input. So let's start with the study plan objectives. And what does it involve, basically? So what we're trying to do in general is collect baseline information on the sort of the structure of the Earth and the composition, geochemistry, geohazards like erosion, height of the land, which is like which is also called topography, the shape of the land, the height of the land, soils, and sediments. So sediments found at the bottom of lakes, rivers, and streams. So we're just trying to get that baseline information to sort of get that snapshot of the way things are now. So we want to just, in doing that, we want to describe the geology both locally and regionally. We want to describe the potential geological hazards like erosion. We want to look at the chemistry of the materials that would would be used for construction, which are disturbed because they're accessed from the project study area, such as the rock and the gravel. We want to look at the chemistry of those materials to see if they might cause harm to the environment. We uh, we want to look at the potential for contamination of soils or sediments by understanding the soil and sediment in the project study area. And then finally, we want to describe the soil layers and depths for multiple purposes. Now, the overall purpose of these studies, again, is to understand the way things are now, the existing conditions. And then by doing that, it helps us identify and evaluate alternatives. We now have multiple alternatives. We're trying to come up with a preferred corridor. So this work helps feed into and help us make decisions to narrow things down a bit. And then finally, another overall purpose is to support the engineering side, the engineering and design side of the road by giving us information that can help us on the civil side and on the structural side as well. So these investigations, how do they help an environmental assessment or an impact assessment? Well, they help identify where we can get material to build the road with, so potential aggregate sources. They help us understand the soils where the stream crossings are going to be. That helps us understand how to design, for example, bridge abutments, because we know the soils that those abutments would be sitting on or sitting in. It helps us map route alternatives. It helps us identify the best route from a what you call a geotechnical basis, so based on the properties of the subsurface, so of the soil and rock below ground, as well as just the general terrain types, such as muskeg and more upland areas as well too. Um, and then finally the consultation process, environmental and geotechnical studies with them happening at the same time as the initial design, that helps our field programs, our geotechnical field programs, to look at what's underground, be reassessed and evaluated, and 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 adjust based on where we are in the project. So this work is it's changing. The locations where the sampling is done changes over time based on information that's been collected as part of the project. So when we talk about drilling and well investigation, what we're trying to do there is get a sort of a vertical profile of what's happening underground. So we're trying to understand the layers of soil or rock and how thick they are, and be able to describe them sort of technically. And then at the same time, when we do this work, quite often we might be installing water wells. And we're doing that so that we can understand groundwater levels. When you install what's called a piezometer, it helps you understand measure the depth to groundwater, and then that helps us understand how groundwater levels change from season to season. And then we're also able, in some cases, to take samples of the groundwater and then test those samples as well. Let's talk a little bit now about soil and sediment sampling field activities. So um, we're trying to understand the soil types in different areas. We do sort of preliminary work by looking at superficial geology, quaternary deposit maps. So these are geology maps, bedrock geology maps as well. We look at these, and we, we're trying to understand, what we're trying to do is understand um, what types of soil are in these places, especially in the places where, we are hoping to get construction material, such as gravel and crushed rock as well too. Um, and then, so once the temporary and the permanent infrastructure, so beyond just the 2-lane road, the other infrastructure that's associated with the road, like the uh, pits and quarries, the construction camps, laydown areas. Once we start getting that information, we try to understand. We'll do some additional work to understand what the soils are in those areas to help us with um, positioning these areas, and understanding when we're building permanent structures, how to build them as well too. So this next slide gives people an idea. When I talk about soil profiles, when we drill a borehole, we're basically trying to get a vertical profile of the different types of soil or rock um, that are in the subsurface, that are underground. So we drill it, and then we look at how the soil changes, and we measure how thick each layer is in that particular location, and that gives us an idea. We might even indicate if we encountered groundwater, right? Water that's underground, between the rocks, those areas like that as well. So that's what we're sort of looking for when we do that kind of work. In terms of the aggregate source investigations, just getting back to that in a little bit more detail, we do that preliminary work to identify areas that are potential sources for gravel and for bedrock that could be crushed into material that could be used for construction. We identify the most sort of promising prospects. Then we do some field work, right? So we'll do some shallow holes to get a sense for what kind of material might be there and how thick it might be as well. And then we do an assessment of bedrock prospects. We look at mapping and other information that's available to us. We follow a lot of the clues that are available based on existing information. We look at aerial photos as well. Um, and then, all this is part of trying to sort of figure out not only where the material is, but how much might be there to serve the project as well. In terms of the geotechnical field investigations, when we're looking at things from a geotechnical perspective, we're trying to understand the properties of the soil and of the subsurface so that, and this is more used for engineering purposes. Um, so we're trying to, but obviously other information is collected from it, but what we do is we take samples of the soil and we do tests on them, standard penetration testing that tests the strength of the soil. We take pictures of the soil types and we log information in a structured way in these what's called borehole logs to get a sense for that vertical profile of different soil types. And that's used really to give our engineers an understanding of the soil that they might be working with if they were to build a bridge, for example, and where the abutments would, and how the abutments have to be built, and on either side of a bridge where a bridge crossing might be. So it's really important to get that information so that our engineers have some level of confidence in their preliminary design. And then the other thing we do is geochemical investigations, and I talked a little bit about this before. That's where we take samples of rock, and then we test those samples, and they're tested for um, their potential for metals to leach out of the rock or acids to come out of the rock. And so when we talk about acid rock drainage or metal leaching, we're talking about exposing and disturbing sulfide bearing rocks. So these sulfides um, being in the rocks can cause acidic runoff, and that acidic runoff, so when that's released from the rocks being disturbed, it mixes with water, and that in runoff, and then that one runoff can damage aquatic habitats, kill fish, contaminate water supplies. It can also corrode, and this is an important one, concrete foundations and bridges, metal culverts and pipes. So that's why we need to understand the rock. So we understand where the rock is, where the gravel is, but we still have to test it to see what potential it might have for causing further contamination, because we don't want to do that. So that's another activity that's involved in our geology, terrain, and soil investigations. And in terms of activities underway, we've got another geotechnical program, or a drilling program coming up, I should say, um, very soon. I'm not sure exactly when. There'll be more monitoring wells installed to help us understand the hydrogeology, right? The flow and of groundwater and the quality of the groundwater, which is the water beneath in the subsurface, like beneath the ground, not the surface water, but the groundwater. Um, so we've got those activities underway. There's lots going on that front. And again, this program shifts as we learn more about where we want to put the road as well, too. So that wraps up today's discussion of geology, terrain, and soil studies. We hope this was helpful, and we hope it encourages you to join us again next week when we talk about the aquatic studies. Don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information on our website, northernroadlink.ca. And I'd just like to say miigwech, and make sure to look out for our project updates on social media and our website.